I once thought, if I behaved, stayed agreeable, and was kind enough, then I would be loved. I believed that until the very man I called my husband smiled faintly as I was humiliated in front of his entire family. I once stayed silent. I once endured. I once shrank myself to fit into the frame others called a woman's place in the family. Until one day I looked at my own reflection in the mirror, faded, drained, and unrecognizable. And I understood. No one can save you from the iron cage built out of sweet words, unless you are the one who walks out. This is not a story of glamorous revenge, nor is it a loud feminist manifesto. This is the journey of a woman from silence to freedom, from being excluded to rewriting the rules under her own name. If you are listening to this story, perhaps you too have once shrunk yourself for someone else. And if so, then this is the whisper meant for you. We do not need to win. We only need to stop asking for permission to be ourselves. Chapter 1. You should be grateful we let you into the house. I still remember that feeling vividly. The feeling of standing in the middle of the mansion's grand hall while my husband's entire family bustled around preparing for their private jet vacation. I stood there, my hands resting lightly on my stomach as the wave of nausea had just passed. None of them knew I was 6 weeks pregnant. Not because I was hiding it, but because I hadn't had the chance to say it yet. Or rather, no one ever gave me the chance. I heard the wheels of the suitcases rolling across the marble floor, the lively chatter and laughter filling the air. Anthony, my husband, was on the phone, his eyes fixed not on me, but on the designer bags being loaded into the car. I looked at him. He didn't look back. My mother-in-law glanced at me as if I were a servant who had accidentally stepped into the frame. I thought you weren't going, she said, her lips curling into a half smile. The plane has just enough seats for family. You can take the bus. I froze. I thought she was joking, until another relative made it even clearer. You should be grateful we even let you into the house. Take the bus, Kristen. I turned to Anthony out of reflex for one last shred of support, but he just stood there forcing a smile, no reaction, no defense, not a word. That was when I understood. I wasn't family. I had never been family. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there feeling like some unwanted object they couldn't throw away yet, but certainly didn't want to bring along. I had been married to Anthony for nearly 3 years. 3 years I believed I was building a family. I moved into his family's house after the wedding, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I wanted to belong, to be a proper daughter-in-law. I cooked, I cleaned, I helped during holidays. I smiled, nodded, and stayed silent whenever I was criticized, all so I wouldn't ruin the family atmosphere Anthony insisted was very important. Back then, I truly believed that if I was good enough, they would accept me, but I was wrong. They didn't need someone good. They only needed someone like them. At every party, I was assigned to pour wine and hand out napkins like a servant. In family photos, I was accidentally left outside the frame. I once saw my mother-in-law rearrange the frames on the wall, removing the one photo that included me. When I told Anthony, he just laughed. "You're being too sensitive," he said. "They just need time." Time after 3 years, I was still a stranger, so I started keeping quiet. I stopped talking about the times I was excluded, stopped telling my friends. I was afraid that if I spoke up, I would embarrass them. I didn't want to be the one to ruin the harmony. But that so-called harmony, it was nothing more than a cold greenhouse where I had to cut away pieces of my true self to fit into the space they had created. And that day, when they left me behind with those words, "You should be grateful," the only thing I saw in their eyes was satisfaction. They had successfully rid themselves of the thorn that didn't share their bloodline, their status. I don't know which hurt more, being excluded from the trip, or seeing the man I once trusted smile along as they did it to me. That was the first time I looked at Anthony and saw how small he truly was, not in size, but in strength of character. and at that very moment, I knew. I was standing in the middle of a family that no matter how much I sacrificed, would never call me their own. It wasn't about the trip. It wasn't about the plane ticket. It was about the fact that they never intended to keep me close. They only kept me near enough to use, then cast me aside when I was no longer needed. And this time, I wasn't going to stand still anymore. Chapter 2. I thought being good enough was all it took. On my very first day as Anthony's wife, I carried nothing more than a suitcase and a heart full of hope. I stepped into that luxurious mansion thinking, as long as I'm kind enough, try hard enough, surely everything will be fine. That's what I thought. Every morning, I woke up early to prepare breakfast for the whole family with my own hands, even though no one asked me to. No one ever said thank you. Still, I persisted. Whenever there was a party, I was the one in the kitchen. His mother was busy with her makeup, while his cousin Victoria, the type of woman who only held a wine glass, would casually say, "This dish needs more salt," without even tasting it. I wasn't allowed to call my in-laws Mom and Dad. One time when I absent-mindedly called out Mom, I finished cooking. She shot me a cold look and said, "Kristen, I think we should keep things proper." I remember nodding quickly, blushing, and apologizing as if I had committed some terrible sin. I was treated like an outsider, but constantly reminded that this family doesn't like making a fuss, that I needed to be patient to blend in. They never directly said I wasn't worthy. They didn't have to. Every silence, every half smile laced with disdain was enough to tell me. I remember one Christmas when we threw a big, extravagant party. Relatives filled the house loud and lavish. Anthony, dressed in his suit, gave me a quick hug before melting into the crowd with them. When I approached a group chatting together, Victoria looked me up and down, her gaze landing on my dress. "Oh, Kristen, is that?" Zara, the question sounded harmless, but in her eyes and that crooked smile, I knew it wasn't. It was a jab, a subtle reminder that I wasn't dressed in designer like the rest of them. I forced a smile, but inside it stung. Another time I saw them taking family photos in front of the Christmas tree. Just as I stepped forward, my mother-in-law said, "Kristen, could you fetch the hairdryer from the bathroom?" I turned away. By the time I came back, the photo had already been taken, without me in it. Of course, that photo was printed large and hung right in the living room. I saw it every single day. I used to think maybe I just needed more time. That if I did better, if I was less sensitive, if I toned down my differences a little, maybe they would open their hearts to me. So I began to change. I forced myself to smile while they talked about $1,000,000 vacations I had never even dreamed of. I changed my hairstyle, dressed in the classic fashion they preferred. I learned to sit quietly at the dining table, only nodding and smiling. But the more I changed, the further I drifted from myself. And the worst part, they didn't care. I used to be a freelance interior designer with my own clients, my own style. After marriage, I paused my career because Anthony said, "You don't need to work so hard anymore." But deep down, I think he just didn't want me to be more successful than him. Every time I was invited to take on a big project, he came up with excuses. "The household needs you more," or "my family won't like it if you're absent." And I listened, because I thought love meant compromise. Love meant waiting. Love meant sacrifice. But in his family, love only meant knowing exactly where my place was. And the most heartbreaking part, I started to believe them. I began to think I was truly small, that I should be grateful to even be in such a family, even if I was looked down on. That I was just an outsider lucky enough to stand near their glow. I stopped writing. I stopped sketching. I stopped being myself. It wasn't until I saw the pregnancy test turn positive that I finally woke up. I remember sitting alone in the bathroom, trembling. Not because I was afraid of motherhood, but because I knew I didn't want this child to grow up in a house where its mother had no voice. I needed to change, not for me, but because the child in my womb deserved a strong mother. And the first thing I did was not tell Anthony. Not out of revenge, but because for the first time in years I wanted something that was mine alone. Chapter 3: The only one who saw me as human. I once thought no one in Anthony's family would ever truly care about me until his grandmother Stella asked me to sit down for tea one Thursday afternoon. At first I assumed she just wanted to talk about the weekend party or ask me for help like always. But instead of discussing food or decorations, she slid a small plate of cookies toward me and asked, "Are you okay, Kristen?" I smiled automatically. "Yes, I'm fine." "No." She tilted her head, studying me closely. "I mean, are you really okay?" I looked up, and for the first time since entering this house, I saw eyes that weren't scrutinizing, judging, or cold. They were the eyes of someone who had lived long enough, who had seen enough sorrow to recognize when someone was hiding pain behind a smile. I wanted to cry, but I only lowered my head and gave a small nod. She didn't press further. We just sat there drinking tea without pretense, without force. From that day on, Grandma Stella began inviting me into her room more often. Sometimes just to ask about a book, a fabric sample, or to offer me the snacks she hid in her drawer, because those people don't know how to appreciate them. With her, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't have to brace myself. I didn't have to be the good daughter-in-law or the proper wife. I didn't need to shrink or ask permission for every word. I could simply be myself. One afternoon, while I was folding blankets in my room, Stella knocked and stepped inside. She sat beside me, her eyes fixed on my trembling hands. Then she spoke softly. "I once went through what you're going through." I looked up, startled. She smiled, her gaze drifting far away. Back then, when I married into this family, I was an outsider too. They didn't accept me because I didn't come from a prestigious bloodline. I was called a woman here for money. I endured in silence until the day I lost my first child, and I swore I would never let any woman near me go through that alone. I froze. I had never told anyone about my failed IVF cycle. No one in this house knew, not even Anthony. They just thought I hadn't tried hard enough. I had never confessed that my greatest fear was, if I lost this child too, I'd have nothing left to hold on to. She didn't ask me if I was pregnant, but somehow, I think she knew. The next day, she slipped a small envelope inside the book I had left open. Inside was a bank card and a handwritten note. "If you want to try IVF again, don't let money stop you. And if you are already pregnant, then this is an early gift of celebration. Keep it secret. This will be our secret." I clutched the note tightly in my hands. I had thought I was strong. But in that moment, I broke down and sobbed like a child. Not because of the bank card, but because for the first time, someone was on my side with no conditions attached. She didn't need me to be perfect. She didn't need me to prove I was worthy. She just wanted me to exist freely as myself. I hid her gift carefully. I didn't tell Anthony. I didn't tell anyone. But deep inside, for the first time in so long, I didn't feel alone. Her silence wasn't indifference. It was a kind of mature love, one that didn't boast, didn't demand, but showed up at the right time in the right way for the right person. From then on, I started writing again, picking up the journals I had abandoned, sketching the design ideas I had once folded away in a drawer. I lived quietly, but I was no longer just a shadow. And then, that fateful day came, the day the entire family mocked me in front of each other, the day they said I should be grateful to be allowed into their house, the day Anthony stood there watching me humiliated and only smiled. I thought I would collapse. But as I turned to leave from my room, Stella called out to me. "Kristen," she said, "come to the study. I have something we need to discuss." And I followed her, my heart pounding, not from fear, but because I knew something was about to change. Chapter 4: The closed study and the nod of a woman who never needed to shout Grandma Stella's study was the quietest room in this otherwise noisy mansion. No one entered without an invitation. It carried the scent of old wood black tea and something else, something that radiated power. Not loud or showy, but enough to make you instinctively sit up straighter. I stepped in and gently closed the door behind me. She was already seated at the table, her hand resting on a thick folder of documents. The tea had been poured. The cookies were there. But this time there was no small talk, no circling around. "Sit down, Kristen." I sat, my heartbeat pounding heavily in my chest. She slid the folder toward me. "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head. "This is my new will. I've rewritten it entirely." I froze. It took me several seconds before I managed to ask, "Why? Are you showing this to me?" She looked at me, her gaze calm, almost cold. "Because I didn't write it for them. I wrote it for you. And for the child you're carrying." My breath caught. I had never told her I was pregnant. I had never told anyone. Yet somehow she knew. I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the bold lines. Every asset listed: shares in the food corporation, 2 properties, long-term investments, a trust fund, offshore accounts. All of it would be placed into a trust. Beneficiary: the unborn child of Kristen M. Guardian, with full authority until the child turned 25, Kristen M. I looked up, my mouth dry. "What are you doing?" "I'm correcting a wrong," she said. Correcting the things I've spent a lifetime silently watching but never stopping. I kept reading. There was a special clause. If Kristen divorced Anthony, she would still retain full authority over the trust. If Anthony ever demanded a share, the entire trust would be transferred directly to a women's rights charity. I could hardly believe what I was reading. She poured me more tea calmly, as if we were discussing the weather. "Kristen, do you think they will ever change? They won't. But you can. You don't need to beg for a seat at a table they never wanted you to sit at." I choked up as though someone had just opened a door I hadn't even known existed. "Aren't you afraid they'll be furious?" I asked. "I used to be, but not anymore." She took a sip of tea and set the cup down. "When you grow old, you'll understand sometimes. The kindest thing is letting people bear the consequences of their own arrogance." I looked at her. That small, silver-haired woman, neatly tied back, didn't need to shout, didn't need to argue. And yet, with the stroke of a pen, she had rewritten the entire game, and she had chosen me to hold the board. I wanted to thank her, but no words felt enough. I just sat there, my hands resting on my belly, where life was quietly growing, and whispered inside my mind. My child will not grow up in their mother's silence. My child will see their mother rise and walk forward. Stella placed her hand over mine. "Don't rush to act, Kristen. Let them play out their game. When they lay down their cards, that's when we'll reveal the ace." I nodded, feeling a strength flow through me like never before. When I left that study, I was no longer the Kristen who stayed quiet, endured and swallowed her tears at every insult. I was the woman who would protect her child at any cost. And for the first time in my life, I had a true ally, another woman, a woman once trampled who now stood tall, pen in hand, rewriting destiny for 2 generations. Chapter 5. One Will an Entire Empire Cracks. After that conversation in Stella's study, I didn't change overnight. I continued playing the familiar role, the obedient daughter-in-law who knew how to stay silent. I still brought tea to my mother-in-law, still lowered my head. When ordered to fetch a towel, still smiled. When Victoria made her snide remarks about my fashion being far too simple, I didn't do it out of weakness. I did it because I understood one truth. The cruel always believe they're safe as long as their victims remain silent. And I was silent, but no longer weak. A week later, the family prepared for a trip to the mountain resort. Anthony told me to stay home because the roads are too dangerous for a pregnant woman. It sounded caring, but in reality, it was just another polite way of saying, "You don't need to show up." I didn't protest. I just nodded, smiled softly, and quietly packed a small suitcase not for vacation, but to move out of the main house. I relocated to the guest house by the lake where Stella had chosen to spend her later years. Stella didn't join the trip either. She said, "I'm too old, the mountains tire my knees." but I knew the real reason she stayed behind to witness the fall of those who thought themselves untouchable. On the morning of their departure, I saw them off with a gentle smile. Victoria peeked at me from behind her sunglasses, her lips curling in mock pity. "Take care of the house," she said. "That's probably what you do best." I nodded. "Don't worry, I will." Anthony gave me a half-hearted hug like one would pat a colleague on the shoulder. I didn't mind. I had stopped expecting anything from him. The car rolled away, carrying them to the private airport, and a few hours later, the storm began. Not rain, but a legal storm. I received a call from Ashley Stella's private lawyer. She spoke only one sentence. "The time has come. I've just sent the officially notarized will to every family member, by email hard copy and to the press." I stood in the small kitchen of the lakeside guest house, clutching the teacup Stella had just poured, listening to birds outside, and smiled. Meanwhile, at the airport, Anthony's entire family was in chaos. Minutes later, I received the first message from Anthony. "What the hell is this, Kristen? Did you know about this?" I left the phone on silent. Then came Victoria's message. "What kind of trick is this? Stella can't do this." My mother-in-law's message was shorter. "You sly little fox." I exhaled slowly, not out of shock, but out of relief. The will detonated like an atomic bomb within their family. Everything they thought would naturally be theirs was gone. No mansion, no company shares, no trust funds, no lakeside house, nothing. Just $10,000 each, a token consolation, as Stella had worded it, because I don't wish you to be left entirely empty-handed, though that would be deserved. Meanwhile, an unborn child of a woman they had always scorned was named sole heir to the entire estate, and that woman, me, would hold full authority for the next 25 years. Company stock where Anthony worked began to plummet. News leaked to the press business tycoon Stella Green rewrites will in shocking move, financial empires to be controlled by unborn great-grandchild. Reporters called. Journalists crowded at the mansion gates. And me. I sat beside Stella at the window, working on a crossword puzzle, sipping cinnamon tea. "Do you feel sorry for them?" Stella asked. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No," I said, "because if they had ever valued love, they wouldn't have lost everything to their arrogance." That night, I received a call from Anthony. I answered. "You knew about this. You conspired. Why would you do this? You think you've won." His voice seethed with rage, as if I had just stolen his throne. I spoke only one sentence softly. "This isn't about Victoria. This isn't about your mother. This is because you laughed." And then I hung up. No tears, no trembling, no regret. Just the simple truth that finally I had spoken out. Chapter 6. I didn't leave them. I just took myself back. I don't know the exact moment I stopped loving Anthony. Maybe it was when he stood by silently as I was humiliated. Maybe it was when he smiled with Victoria as I was excluded from the family photo. Or maybe it was when he asked me, "Are you sure you even belong in my world?" But I know the moment I let go. It was when he shouted over the phone, demanding that I do something to stop the will. When he asked what I had said to his grandmother. When he began to see me as the problem instead of the very things he had long hidden under the name of family. I looked out over the lake behind the guest house. The sky was clear, still as if no storm had ever passed, and I realized I didn't need to leave his family, because the truth was, I had never belonged there. 2 days later, I filed for divorce. No accusations, no lawsuits, no battles. Just a single sheet of paper with 2 words, "I choose myself." Anthony didn't respond immediately, but I knew he would sign. Not because he understood, but because by now, I was no longer the ace up his sleeve he thought he could keep hidden. After filing, I returned to the mansion one last time, not to apologize, not to say goodbye. I went only to reclaim what was mine, a box of books, a few sketches, and the journal my mother had left me before she passed away. My mother-in-law watched me from the top of the stairs, her eyes a mix of panic and bitterness. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off first. I came to take my things, not to ask for forgiveness. Victoria pretended to be busy on the phone, but I saw her hands trembling. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she tasted the fear of losing control. When I carried my suitcase outside, Stella was waiting for me in the car. She opened the passenger door. "Are you sure?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm not running away. I'm walking toward peace." She smiled. A small smile, but enough for me to know she understood. We drove away from the mansion like people who had nothing left to prove, without looking back. We moved into the lakeside house, a warm little wooden cottage, where morning sunlight slipped through the curtains and the night wind whispered like a lullaby. I tended the back garden, planted lavender and mint, bought a rocking chair for the porch. Stella said, "This is your home now." I said no. This is a home for three, because inside me, a tiny life was growing each day. Every morning, Stella and I drank tea, read books, and worked on crosswords. Every evening, we wrote journal entries for the unborn child, telling of the days when its mother had been so fragile and of how she had risen again. I no longer carried my husband's surname. I re-signed every legal document with my mother's name. I was no longer a daughter-in-law, no longer Kristen somebody's wife. Now, I was Kristen, the mother of a child and the daughter of myself. One afternoon, as the sky threatened rain, Stella asked me, "If there's one thing you wish you could do over..." What would it be? I thought for a while, then replied, "I wish I had never believed that silence was the way to be loved." She nodded, her eyes glistening. So do I. Time moved slowly by the lake, but each day I felt truly alive. No noise, no competition, no pretending to fit the role. Just myself, enough and whole, I think. Perhaps that is what people call freedom. Chapter 7. The day I became a mother, I also lost one. I gave birth to Elise on a bright sunny afternoon. The sky was so blue, it felt as if it knew my soul had already weathered enough storms. A small delivery room in a local hospital. No imported roses, no reporters, no relatives crowding in to take photos. Just me, Ashley, the friend who had become family, and Stella, the woman I truly believed. If the universe had a gentle mother, she would surely look like her. I cried, not from pain, but because... When I heard Elise's first cry, I knew my daughter would never have to ask for permission just to exist. Stella held Elise in her trembling arms. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at the baby for a long while. I saw her eyes turn red. "Are you all right?" I asked. She shook her head, then smiled. "I'm fine. It's just, now I can go." I clutched her hand, whispering, "Don't say that." "No, Kristen." She looked at me, her gaze both tender and resolute. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just moving to the back seat so you can drive now." 3 weeks after Elise was born, Stella passed away in her sleep. No illness, no pain, no warning. Just one morning, I brewed tea, knocked lightly on her door as usual. No answer. I opened the door, stepped inside, and knew a journey had ended. Her funeral was simple, exactly as she wished. No distinguished guests, no extended family, only those she had truly loved. She left me a handwritten letter, written in shaky but steady script. "Kristen, I did not leave you an inheritance to make you rich. I left it because you know how not to let yourself be lost. Teach Elise to love without having to kneel. Teach her this: being a woman does not mean enduring. Being a woman means knowing when to stay and when to rise and leave. Stella." I folded the letter and pressed it to my heart, and I swore I would keep her words. That winter, I took Elise for walks along the lake. Each tiny step of hers was a step pulling me further from the past. Each laugh of hers was another shard of light. I began to write again, not just whispered journal entries in the night, but a real book. Its title, The Silent Room. The story of a woman once abandoned, who once quietly stepped back, then quietly stepped forward, carrying both a child and an entirely new world. I did not hate Anthony. Hatred is still a string tying you to the one who's gone. I chose to forget, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve freedom. Victoria once sent me an email just once, a few months after Stella's death. The content was simply, "You won. Are you happy?" I didn't reply, because this was never a competition. One night while Elise slept soundly, I looked at her, then at myself in the mirror. No more the silent wife's reflection, no more the fearful eyes. I was a mother, a woman who had lost everything and found it all again. I whispered, as if answering myself, I don't need to win. I just need to never shrink myself again. Chapter 8, A Life That Doesn't Need Permission. The first month, Elise began to speak. She didn't say Mama or Grandma. The very first word she uttered was no. At first I was startled, but then I laughed. My daughter from the very beginning already knew how to say no, to draw boundaries, to know what was hers and what was not. I saw Stella somewhere in that strong gaze, and I saw myself too in a form that had finally healed. I taught Elise this: you don't need anyone's permission to be yourself. You don't need to bow your head to be accepted. You don't need to trade your kindness in exchange for something they call love. She grew up not in luxury, but in peace, not forced into crowded parties to save face, not made to smile when she didn't want to, not told you're a girl, so you should. I let her choose dress or pants, ponytail or shaved head, piano lessons or mountain climbing, because I know the small choices of today are the roots of a strong woman tomorrow. I never told Elise the details about Anthony. I didn't need to. She knew what real love was, not from stories, but from the way her mother's eyes looked at her, from the full presence I gave each time I listened. I still keep Stella's letter in a small wooden frame on my writing desk. Sometimes Elise asks, "Who is this?" I answer, "The first person who ever saw your mother as someone who mattered." Later, my book, The Silent Room, was published. Not a bestseller, not a movie adaptation, just a small book quietly passed from hand to hand among women enduring their own silence. I received emails that I printed and tucked away. I filed for divorce after reading Chapter 4. I decided to keep my baby. For the first time in 10 years, I slept without dreaming of myself crying. No one knew I was the author. I used a pseudonym because I didn't need recognition. I only needed freedom. One day, Elise, by then 6 years old, was playing with puzzle pieces when she asked, "Mama, can I do anything I want when I grow up?" I paused, looked at her, and replied, "As long as you don't hurt yourself. Just to be loved by someone else, you can do anything you want." She nodded as if she understood, and I thought perhaps I had fulfilled what Stella entrusted me with. I did not seek revenge. I did not fight to seize anything. I did not revel in their downfall. I simply walked away. And by walking away, I had already changed the future of another small woman. Elise would never have to learn silence as a way to survive. She would grow up knowing gentleness is not weakness, and strength does not mean a life of suffering. I once thought happiness meant being loved, being acknowledged, being accepted. But now I know happiness is living without having to prove anything at all. I closed my journal, poured myself a cup of tea, sat on the porch gazing at the still surface of the lake. No applause, no cheering, no glorious ending. Just a peace so deep it seeped into my bones. Because in the end, I didn't need to win. I only needed to never shrink myself again. I don't know who you are. I don't know what room you're standing in or how many eyes are making you feel small. But if you've stayed with me until now, then let me tell you, this silence is not a sign of maturity. Sometimes it is a cry for help smothered into a sigh. I once loved the wrong way. I once tried the wrong way. I once gave my kindness to people who never knew how to cherish it. But then I understood our greatest power isn't in making someone regret. It's in the ability to walk away and never look back. I left them, but I did not fall apart. I rose and rebuilt a world where my daughter would never have to apologize for being herself. And if I could do that, then so can you. No shouting, no applause, Just one small step each day. We are worthy, even when they say we're not, even when we ourselves once doubted it. Thank you for staying until the very end. And if you're ready, then here is the door, and you are the key.